fourth and final lecture of this year's Architecture Lecture Series. We are pleased to be partnering with the Aspen Institute on this. This is the second year of the Architecture Lecture Series, and the idea of the Architecture Lecture Series is to bring world-renowned architects to Aspen to talk in public about architecture, how it relates to society, how form, style, and purpose impact our engineered landscape. Speakers in this year's series have included Nadir Tarani of the Boston-based firm Studio Da, Dan Wood and Amal Andros of the New York-based firm Work AC, and Brad Clofield of Portland, Oregon's Allied Works Architecture. The Architecture Lecture Series is generously underwritten by Judith Neiser, Jan and Ronnie Greenberg, who are with us tonight, and the City of Aspen Community Development Department, which is also well represented tonight. Tonight I'm delighted to introduce our guest lecturer, Chris McVoy. Before I do that, I'm just going to, though, acknowledge this sweater that I'm wearing, which is actually an artwork. This is an artwork by an artist named Lisa Ann Auerbach that we are doing a project with this fall, and it's a Get Out the Vote exhibition. And she has knitted all of these sweaters, and she's used campaign slogans from a while ago. These are actually slogans from the 19th century, but it's amazing how current they are. This one says something about let us have peace, and the back says something like reduce taxes before taxes reduce us. And so it's interesting how American politics just continues in much the same way and the same vein. But you'll see these sweaters on view at the Aspen Art Museum this fall and also in the windows of shops around town. And if you would like to wear them, you just come and leave some form of identification, and you can also check them out and wear them around town. So I'm wearing this one tonight to premiere it. Chris McVoy is a senior partner at Steven Holl Architects, which is an award-winning international firm based in New York City and Beijing. He received his bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Virginia and his master's of architecture from Columbia University. He was the recipient of numerous honors, including a Guggenheim studentship, the William Kinney Travel Fellowship, and an American Scandinavian Foundation grant. He has been with Steven Holl Architects for 15 years and is instrumental in establishing the firm's reputation as one of the most innovative in the field of architecture. Recently, he oversaw the renovation of the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City, which received several awards, including Time Magazine's Best Architectural Marvel of 2007. Paul Goldberger of The New Yorker also named the building one of the best of the last generation. Chris McVoy has directed the renovations and expansions of several other art institutions, including the Cranbrook Institute of Science in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and the Phoenix Art Museum in Arizona, also the Museum of Contemporary Art in Helsinki. He is currently partner in charge of such high-profile projects as the Highline Hybrid in New York City, the Sail Hybrid in Naakheist, Belgium, the Peninsula Resort in Akbuk, Turkey, as well as the project advisor of the Herning Center of the Arts in Herning, Denmark. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Chris McVoy.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight, and I want to thank the Art Museum, the Aspen Institute, and the City Development Corporation for inviting me. When I began thinking about this lecture, the notes or in the invitation mentioned that I was invited to speak about the role of public architecture in our society and how its form, style, and purpose impact our landscape. And the more I thought about that, I realized that the term public architecture and the notion public architecture that we've inherited, unlike politics, needs to be updated, needs to be expanded today. So tonight I'm going to talk about ways of the way we would like to define public and the public realm in architecture and how that can be part of our society, hopefully as a positive force. As we all know now, over the last 20 years, we've learned that the globe is one environment and it's one ecosystem. And with this knowledge, we've also learned that any building, any act, anywhere on the globe has an impact, whether it be very small or large, on the environment. So the notion that there are projects that exist that are not part of the public realm is suspect. So, for example, this is a typical day or typical evening in Beijing, and the decisions that were made, the developments and the architecture that was built around Beijing have created this, the dependence on the automobile, et cetera. And this is, in a way, this is a form of public space, one that's been degraded, and one that, as architects, we should try to address in every project we do. On the other side, more and more we face conditions where much of our environment is built, large-scale developments, which are closed off, which are gated communities. This one's also in Beijing. And this notion that this problem of huge parts of our cities are not publicly accessible and are for the private realm is a real problematic that we've also tried to address in our own small way with the projects we've done. So tonight I'm going to talk about new urban hybrids, where we've tried to take on these urban challenges, create new models, and most of these are in China, where we've been working for about 4 years. Also, green infrastructure. We've been taking on projects that design architects often don't, for example, a water treatment plant or a district energy center, as trying to turn these kinds of urban infrastructures that are typically industrial buildings into green space or public space, given the densification of our cities and the urgent need for improving the city quality of life. This is one aspect that we can turn to improve the quality of our cities. And finally, we've done a lot of cultural institutions, universities, museums, and in all cases we try to make them as open to their communities, what we call porous, and that they're really not just museums in the traditional sense, but forums for discourse on art in our society. So I term them platforms. First project I'd like to show you is in Beijing. Here's the Forbidden City down here. Our site is on the route from the new airport road, which has, for about 5 miles, Olympic banners the whole way now, of course. And the stadium's, the bird's nest is right up here. So it's a pivotal site. And when we started this 6 years ago now, we were given 3 months by the developer to come up with a concept, and we were given a program of only apartments, nothing else, 2.2 million square feet of just apartments. So we analyzed the Beijing fabric, history, and one of the beautiful things about Beijing is the hutongs. And the pre-1980 Beijing was a horizontal city, and the hutongs are these alleys that are vibrant with commercial activities, all kinds of activities. Post-1980, you see around Beijing a lot of monolithic towers, only apartment buildings, no infrastructure, no kind of commercial activities, and that's a real problem. Everyone has to get in their car. So what we said was, let's do a hybrid, where a horizontally connected vertical city, piece of a city, where this is public space, kind of infusing the development with that notion of a horizontal community space within the towers. And here you see a model of the project. It's 8 towers, all connected by bridges, which have public activities and spas and restaurants and bars. The other thing we did is we opened up the ground floor plane, took away all the fences and put in restaurants, supermarkets, a lot of commercial space to serve not only this development but the neighboring developments. And it's all centered around one large space that's about the scale of Rockefeller Center, with a reflecting pool and a cinema. And here you can see that link of bridges that connects all the apartment buildings. And when we showed this to the developer after 3 months of working on it, we were pretty convinced we would be fired, because he had given us a program of 800 apartments, and we gave him 700 apartments, a cinema, a hotel, pools, supermarkets. And there was this moment of silence. He came with 20 of his associates to our office. We presented, and there was a moment of silence, all of his associates looking at him. He's a 50-year-old poet who's become a very wealthy developer, Chinese developer. And he said, anyone can build apartments. I want to build spiritual space, and this is spiritual space. So remarkably, they've built the entire thing, all the ideas that we've put into it. In fact, his only comment was he wanted to add an indoor tennis court because he likes to play tennis. So we, of course, accommodated that. So here you see it in its context. It's your typical, city of the 21st century, late 20th century, strings of highways, point towers, and here's that great space in the middle with a reflecting pool, but it's really become now accessible from the neighborhood, the neighboring communities, and what we did on the ground plane is really open it up with portals, so it's very porous at the ground plane. You can go through all the buildings. These are the shops. These are early model photographs. And there's a feeling of openness to the community between the buildings. The views then are framed by the bridges above. And we thought about it as sort of cinematic space, the way in movies your perspective and your experience can suddenly shift from one scene to another. In this architecture, with all the various portals and movements and passages, we aim for that kind of active experience. So the bridge level then, this is a plan of the bridge level connecting the towers, has a spa exercise area, has galleries, bars, a library, tea house, all these programs that anyone can go to. There are 3 dedicated places where public can go up the elevators, and of course if you live there, you can go up in your own tower. Here it is about 4 months ago, with the bridges just up. The other thing that we proposed to the developer, and they accepted, thankfully, is to heat and cool the entire complex with geothermal wells. There's 600 geothermal wells, 100 meters deep, and they do all the heating and cooling for 2.2 million square feet. So there's no chillers, no boilers, no consumption of fossil fuel. This is the largest residential complex in the world to be heated and cooled geothermally. The other thing that we did is have gray water systems in all the buildings. So there's 2 sets of plumbings, one for the toilets, the other for the showers and the sinks. All the water from the showers and the sinks is collected, it's purified with ozone, and then that's used for the ponds, irrigate the landscape, and to flush the toilets. Water is a really valuable resource in Beijing. It's very dry. So this was a key element. And the geothermal works very well in this kind of climate because you're taking the same amount of heat out of the ground in the winter as you're putting back in the summer. And then, of course, in spring and fall, you have a kind of free cooling mode. At the center of the complex, then, is this water garden, which has this purified, recycled water, and the plants also help to purify it. And we also developed the landscapes. These are mounds, which have actually program spaces in them. This is actually a non-denominational spiritual assembly space in this mound. And we think it just got built, and we suspect that the developer didn't even notice it was in there. It was just in the drawings. So they built it, and there it is. They built so quickly there. That's the advantage. I mean, they started construction about 2 years ago, and we started the project only 5 years ago. The underside of the bridges, we are brightly colored with enamel panels. The color comes from Chinese polychromy, and that helps levitate the bridges. With that bright color, they're floating, and it gives a vibrancy to those Beijing gray days that we've all seen over the last week. So we analyzed the temples, Chinese temples, and selected a dozen colors, and then performed an I Ching random operation with dice. There was a woman in the office throwing die for about 2 weeks, and whatever the results were, we would track that on the elevations. Blue, certain numbers meant blue, red. So she had a nice summer job. Actually, I think it was longer than 2 weeks. And here you see them putting the colors in, but it's only on the jambs. So when you look at the buildings head on, it's sanded aluminum, it's silver, but as you turn, the colors open up and change. So from every angle, the buildings look different. Here's some of these underside soffits. This is a suspended swimming pool in the bridge on the left. The bridges were built on the ground and then lifted up into place, which was quite a feat in this earthquake zone. We went through extensive approval process. Actually, China has a much more sophisticated seismic requirement than anywhere else in the world. Very, very sophisticated engineering there. When you're up on the bridges, it's like a dance. You go from one building to another. You're chained from inside a building to out into the city, all with different angles as you turn. This bridge will become a group exercise lounge area. And you can start to see now with the bridges in these various perspectives out on the complex and the city as you move through. Some of them bend to accentuate the kind of dance between the towers. The towers are various shapes. This bridge will become a swimming pool suspended in the air. And the whole feeling of movement and of urban public activity throughout the complex is really starting to be felt now. The next project is in Shenzhen. This is, Shenzhen is very near Hong Kong. It's the fastest growing city in the world right now. And our site was for another developer, Vanke Center, over on the right. And they own this property. This will be their headquarters. There was an international competition. MVRDV, who I think spoke, Vinnie Moss was here last year, I believe, and several Chinese architects. Anyway, most of them did, as you can see, fairly traditional kind of development, having one building for a convention center, one building for a hotel, one, et cetera. And we said, rather than that, let's make a horizontal skyscraper, one building. It's about as long as the Empire State Building. And that what we would do is lift it up above the landscape and create an open ground plane for the public. This way also, it captures, the form is oriented and takes advantage of the views out into the ocean and the lakes with the mountains behind it. And the other thing is by putting all the programs into one building, we emphasize the urban aspect, the open ground plane, but also it gave the developer flexibility because the program's constantly changing. Sometimes the hotel gets bigger and the residential smaller. And it's easily accommodated with this kind of configuration. So the main idea is to lift the whole building up over a completely accessible landscape ground plane. That, of course, maximizes views, and it creates a microclimate. This is a tropical area, so shade is a very positive thing there. And so the building's shade really helps the microclimate. It also, these are developers, so of course, we made the point, which is they were happy about, that it's higher value with the great views when you're up higher. We built to the very top of, the whole building's lifted up to the top of the allowable building height. But the main thing is, you can see here in this comparison, the master plan we were given allowed for 28,000 square meters of ground plane left for the public. And by lifting the building up, we have 75,000. Here you get a sense of some of the perspectives. These are models. The landscape is highly articulated with mounds and restaurants cut into them. The underside of the buildings are also colored for the same idea of levitation. And the buildings span 50 meters from elevator core to elevator core. Steven invented what he calls this 360-degree bay window. You drop down from above on a stair and you have a view of the underside all the way around. But the other aspect of this, which we developed, was, if you can see in the ground plane, the conference center is actually built into the ground plane with pools and courtyards. So there's this program within the ground and above the ground, and in between is public. The landscape then we developed very carefully with a variety of local indigenous plants for a rich experience. There are many, you can see the mounds are cut and there are restaurants in the mounds. Green roof, that's also publicly accessible with incredible views, photovoltaics. And there's this is the public route up through the building that connects from the hotel through the residential through into the business. This is not long ago. You can see that this competition we won 2 years ago, and this is where they are now. It's unbelievable. 5-story building up 6 stories in the air, spanning 50 meters. And again, a very unconventional structural approach. The Chinese, we were willing to reduce the spans. We said, okay, we did 50 meters in the competition. We won the project. We can make it 30 meters. We don't want to go crazy here. And the engineer says, no, we can make it 50 meters. So this is the engineer with his seismic model test. Very proud. It passed perfectly. They shake this on a table to test the seismic qualities. It's basically bridge technology, suspension cables that are threaded through compression tubes, which is the innovative part. Nobody's done that. That stiffens it, because a bridge, as we know, has a lot of wobble. But you take the cable through the tubes, and it's very stiff. Here are some of the tubes. This is Li Hu, the other partner. He runs the Beijing office. And without him, there's no way we could have done this Chinese work. But you can see the size of these joints, and these are the cables that are fed through them. But it's very efficient, because Steel and tension's much more efficient. So our engineer told us this building has about 40% of the steel tonnage that a building on the ground would have. It's amazing. But the main thing are these views, and of course, the soffits will all be colored. The exterior skin will be a series of operable louvers that are hooked into the sun conditions, so we control the heat gain and the light and the views. There's Steven there, sweeping up, helping the local workers, and they clean up. It's this amazing contrast of the most advanced construction techniques. They have some of the most advanced factories for curtain walls and for fabricated assemblies, but on site, there's still quite primitive techniques. They're actually sweeping up the water and shoveling it into barrels to get rid of the water, in this case. View from the conference center under the ground up to the hovering above. And that's where we are today. This project is another private development project where we've also tried to infuse it with additional programs and publicly accessible programs as part of this idea. And it's on the Aegean Sea in Turkey, very near many of the great Greek sites. Miletos is there, Dinama, of course, where one of the oracles was. So we were we spent a lot of time looking at those cities, the first Western cities, as we know, not the first cities, which were Eastern, but the kind of dense urban quality that they had, leaving the landscape free. Of course, that was for security as much as anything. But there's a lesson there in terms of minimal footprint on the landscape. That's our site there in the dark green. Incredible site on the Aegean. And so our concept really was maximize the natural landscape and keep the development in what we call dense pack islands. So the program here was villas sort of scattered around and townhouses. And we said instead of that, instead of scattering these buildings throughout the landscape, let's compact them, leave as much natural landscape as possible, and aim for a zero ecological footprint. And then developing that further, 3 types: in the ground, on the ground, over the ground. Here on the top of the screen are the townhouses, which are built into the ground. The landscape goes over them like fingers. The bottom of the screen are villas. So instead of individual villas, they're grouped in 3s and 5s, and they're courtyard villas and compact. And then the square are duplexes, smaller. So there's a whole range of living units and prices. And the dense pack has a couple of public spaces, including at the top an assembly space, which you see in this photo that we introduced, and that the developer liked that program. Also, you can see there a reflection pool in the center of the site. That axis is on the equinox, and it has an incredible view out to the Aegean, and under that pool is a hammam, a spa, which we also introduced in the program, and they accepted. So the landscape then, it has this great dry, kind of rough but beautiful quality, which will be preserved where the buildings aren't. These are some of the views, early views from the villas, the courtyard villas. These will go on sale in about a year if anyone's interested. So on the dense pack then, we have at the top this assembly space, taller, and it becomes a kind of landmark for the whole community. Steven's idea here were 3 spirals, and each spiral based on different time of year. The equinoxes, the summer solstice, and the winter solstice. So that the center of the spirals are on those precise axes of the sun at noon during those times, and then it spirals outward from there. And that creates these great light qualities on the interior. This space can be used for concerts, religious activities, weddings, whatever. And that's the ceiling of the space. This is the water purification plant. This is in Connecticut, and it's near New Haven. You can see the site in red there is actually about the same size as the old town square in the 9-square grid of New Haven. And it has an interesting relationship because it's at the very edge of the city where the grid of the city breaks up into the mountains and the moraines and the lake that actually is feeding this water purification plant. So we won this in an interview, and it was interesting. The Water Treatment Authority, which provides all the water to the community, they were very progressive, and they went to the neighborhood and they said, we want you to be involved. Let's form a design committee, which, of course, there were a lot of Yale architects and professors, and so it was a very sophisticated committee, and they chose the architect. The Water Authority said, if you choose the architect, will you support us building this in your neighborhood? And it was a very smart deal, and I think it worked out well for all parties. The neighborhood's happy. The Water Authority's very happy because this is they got to build their 15 million gallon a day treatment facility, but it's a public park. We said at the interview, instead of a building, let's make this a landscape. So we divided it into 6 sectors. Each one is a kind of analog of the treatment process of the water to kind of register what's going on within the plant below in the landscape. So for example, where we have the flocculation, which is the spinning, we have a turbulence lawn. And here are the 6 sectors. The plant is actually under the bubbling marsh below there, and the rest are lawns. We worked with Michael van Valkenburg, who did the landscape. We expanded the existing wetlands, which had been shrunken over the years, and that's brought a lot of biodiversity back to the site. It's interesting, they've been monitoring the number of species, which have already gone up after 3 years. And then the sliver that comes out of the center, you can see it there, the silver long building, is the administrative building, the laboratories, and the kind of publicly accessible pieces. The idea for that was, Steven's idea was an upside-down water drop for the shape, obviously as a reference, but because we like the way the light comes down across the cupped surface of the water, or of the shape into the plant. So here you see it shortly after construction, before the landscape's grown in. This is what we call the sliver, which is an angel hair stainless steel, so it picks up the colors of the sky and the landscape, and it really changes under the weather and the seasons. The green roof over the plant, that was shortly after it opened. Now, after a year, this is what it looks like. It's just 4 inches of soil, needs no irrigation, and it's all sedums, 30 different sedum species. And it's just incredible, the range and how it changes over the seasons, the colors. The entry court, this is designed to bring the public in, to educate them about the importance of conserving water as a natural resource. So there's this whole public route, including this stair goes up to an auditorium. But the other point I'd like to make is the public dimension is only one piece of the story. Obviously, we're interested in light, materiality, the aspects of architecture, space, and for example here, once we have this section, this curving section for the building, this becomes a kind of language of architecture, joy of architecture, where if you cut into it, you get these great shapes and this cupping and this whole sense of form and light and space that comes from the concept. It's not kind of an a priori. It comes out of exploring the basic concept. Inside the lobby, which is also an exhibition space, the unfortunate thing is as this was being built, 9/11 occurred, so that they changed their program, and they're still not allowing public into the building, although that's supposed to change in a few years. They're supposed to start allowing school groups in, which would be great, so they could see where their water that they're drinking and they're showering in, et cetera, really comes from, and they understand the need to conserve it. So this is really an exhibition space. And the quality, the way the light comes down that shape is one thing we were interested in, and this kind of cutting of that shape and the way that the light plays against that. So the section of the building, the gray is the water treatment process, and by setting this into the ground instead of building a building, we could feed the whole process by gravity. So we cut out all the pumps, all that electricity consumption. The whole thing now works by gravity. And the sliver itself sits in the middle of the main piping, so it kind of registers all that stainless steel piping that's below in the landscape. At the very end, that's the main pump room with the clear well tanks. Here you see it at the end. The bottom of the sliver is the main pump room where all the pumps to the neighborhood are, and above is a community meeting room and lecture hall. The sliver, again, we're always engaged with how it's made, how these projects are made, because actually you can learn a lot about the form and developing the form and the potential of the architecture and the material if you understand how it's made. And so we proposed, and they ended up doing this, the sliver's built out of hoops of induction bent steel. Here you see it being welded in a shop. Those were shipped from Seattle to Connecticut and erected in very little time. So those hoops are up, tied together, simple construction. And then the joy of just cutting that form, pulling it out and seeing how the light plays across it. And this idea that it's a new horizon, that it's not a building, but it's a kind of land work that creates, it's always changing with the sky, and it's a kind of new horizon. And we were happy. There was an article in the Times that said, "In my backyard, please," the Infrastructure Beautiful movement. So we thought, okay, if people want this, want a water treatment plant in their community, that's pretty good. Maybe we can continue that. So now I'll talk about the cultural buildings. And the first, some of you may know, it opened 10 years ago. It just celebrated its 10th anniversary in the heart of Helsinki. It's the Finnish Museum of Contemporary Art. And this was won in a competition, international competition. And here, Steven's concept, after being at the site for a week or so, was intertwining, to intertwine the urban condition, the landscape of the north of Finland, and the experience of art. And this led to the term chiasma, which is actually what the museum is named now, coming from Merleau-Ponty, the philosopher, about how one perceives space through the crossing of the view of the eyes. And this became a kind of a concept that we developed in the project, this intertwining, this crossing, or chiasma. These are early study models, various ways to do that. In fact, we cross a public route right through the building to break down the size of the building and make it more porous. And then this idea that the galleries would be neutral containers for the art, but dynamic in their light. There are 25 galleries, each with different types of natural light. So there's a real variation as you move through the building, but the galleries themselves are simple. They're well-proportioned vessels for any kind of art. And the other idea here is to eliminate all middle-scale detail so that only the art occupies the middle scale. You have the scale of the building at the city and the scale of the doorknob, say, or the detail. But the middle ground, there's nothing in the way of the art. And then the low light in the north had a lot to do with the shape, a kind of catcher's mitt for the sun, the low sun. There you see it, it's across from the National Parliament, and this crisscrossing between the more orthogonal urban fabric and the curving torus shape that relates to the institutional buildings. You can see Alvar Aalto's Finlandia Hall in the distance. And that lack of scale, this is the curved portion of the building juxtaposed to the Parliament. So the ground plane in yellow is all what we call an art form, working with the director, Tuula Arkio. So it's open until midnight on the weekends, and it's open until 10 p.m. most weeknights. So the cafe turns into a bar. There are lounges where students can hang out, use the internet. There are events and movies in the theater. That's all open, and the galleries can close off. So this way, it really is, the goal was to make an art forum for contemporary art, and it's being used that way. This is the lobby where that crossing is felt, and the whole perspectival space that we're interested in. As you move up, the space is constantly changing, that we design in perspective. And sometimes we don't even have a plan. We sketch how the experience should be and then work to plan. Here it is on opening day. Fortunately, it's not always that full because the structural engineers were quite concerned. But it really has become a kind of art form for contemporary art in Helsinki. Some of the galleries, different types of light. This is the changing exhibition gallery that can be divided off. Of course, the skylights can be closed. But this billowing space at the top of the building. The cafe and the engagement of the city. And the north end with terraces from the reading areas of the library looking out to the north of Finland, to Lapland. This project finished 2 years ago for the University of Iowa. And unfortunately, it did flood, but it's one of the first ones to be back up and running. It will be up and running soon because it's an art school, and we decided to make it a kind of tough concrete and steel structure. So it's actually survived quite well. It's number 2 on this image, and it's in addition to the art school. And you can see the grid of the city coming down from the right and from the university coming down, crossing the Iowa River, and once it crosses the river, it breaks up in these bluffs. So the concept was a kind of informal building. We called it a formless instrument, and a formless instrument for the making of art and theorizing of art, because it's art and art history. So it has fuzzy edges that open to the landscape intentionally, and the form was developed really as a series of interior platforms around a central space, the library, the auditorium, the galleries, the studio spaces. And then it cantilevers out over a lagoon. They gave us a different site, and in studying it, we said, they actually gave us a site further north, and we said it was too far from the existing school, and it left this kind of forgotten lagoon as a kind of leftover piece of the landscape. So by building next to it and cantilevering over it, we really engaged that body of water, and it's south-facing. It's become a very popular place on campus to hang out. This is one of the main. We threaded a few campus routes right through the building and alongside the lagoon to kind of activate it and make it engage students with the arts and the making of arts. And they have, since this building opened, they've seen a significant increase in undergraduate enrollment in art classes, as well as applications from all kinds of graduate students. So it's really seems so far to be doing what we hoped. So that's the terrace opening out onto the lagoon. That's a work by Richard Archwager there, the seated figure. There's a cafe that opens up there, and of course, like here, winter is as important, and the kind of life that a building can give at night on a route, campus route, is very important. And then the idea, we decided to put the library in the bridge, suspend it over the lagoon, the idea that thought would be suspended in the space of reflection over the lagoon. And that way, we're also right up next to the nature. So this is the reading room, and you really feel the bluff and the woods when you're in there. It's actually become popular for not just the art students, but all over campus. And the changing of the seasons, this openness, the fuzzy edges to the landscape. Another view of the library, which hooks around so you can see across the lagoon to the other side of the library. If you see your friend over there, you can go say hello. The auditorium is lifted above the entrance in this curved form. The material is weathering steel. It's not Corten. It has more copper, so it turns this reddish color, which complements the brick of the existing art building. At the heart of the building is this, what they call the interdisciplinary forum. We opened everything up. You can see into the library, the studios, and the stair becomes a sculptural element connecting everything. And it's a kind of exercise in tension of steel. The whole thing is hung, and we use steel plate, and it's really become a social space. I've seen people have 10-minute discussions on the landings because it becomes a room, it's a landing, it's not just a stair. And of course, people take this instead of the elevator, which was our goal, which maximizes the kind of exchange between the art historians, which are mainly on one level, and the practicing artists on another. And that space is used for events, many faculty, student events. That's the same space. The studios are modeled after Brancusi's studio on the lower right. Same proportion, north light, very simple concrete floors, polished. And then the Nelson Atkins, which was mentioned earlier, finished a year ago. And this project, we won in a competition in 1999. And the charge was to add on to this perfect temple of art built in 1933. And the challenge of how do you add a building to something that is complete in itself. The other challenge was to transform the institution from the 19th century notion of an art museum as a kind of treasure house, as a kind of place to protect these valuables of society, to one that was more open to a 21st century notion of a museum, which is porous to the community, much more activities. And for us, one of the things we wanted to do was to create a more subjective engagement with the art, a less formalized engagement than the old building offered. And so to be able to sort of, the nice thing is it was perfectly intact. Unlike the Met, which has been added onto so many times, this created a kind of perfect foil, something that we could value by creating, in a way, its complement. So the idea when Steven and I walked the site was, rather than make a building of landscape. So our addition is on the right. There are 5 what we call lenses that traverse down the hill. And below them are all the galleries in various spaces. So the museum spaces are kind of folded. It's as if you lifted the landscape up and folded the museum into the park. It's a great sculpture park. And that was we walked the sculpture park and we realized nobody's coming out here. Everybody stays on the north side. This is one of the main assets. Let's put our building into the park and really engage the landscape with the experience of art. This was another competitor who, this is Ando, and all the others also built on the north side. And because they made a building, the difficulty was it was always competing with the mass of the original. So from the start, we said, let's try a complementary contrast, and sort of taking an inspiration from the Klaus Oldenburg shuttlecock, we called it the stone and the feather. The old building is the stone, our building is a feather, lightweight, extending out into the landscape. So that sets up then all these complements. The old building's stone, the new building's glass. The old building is bounded, the new building is open to the landscape. The old building is axial, the new building is meandering. The old building directs your experience of the art, the new building allows meandering paths. And these are early sketches of Steven's about what the quality of the lenses could be. And he immediately thought of them as sort of chunks of ice or kind of lanterns that could be sculpted in the sculpture garden, sort of sculptures in themselves, yet equally important, creating sculpture spaces between them, kind of courts. And on the right, you see the red lines. That's the galleries extending below, of which these blocks of light rise from. Here's this early sketch. We tried many different ways to bring the light down, and in fact, the lenses weren't even there at the beginning. We introduced them in the process, and then there you can see the galleries below the sculpture garden and what we call a T-wall in the heart of the lens that cups out, supports the lens. The structure of the lens has all the mechanics and all that, but most importantly, the cupped undersides channel the light into the galleries. So here's the basic diagram, one level of galleries terracing down into the landscape itself folded, and the lenses from above. And this idea that between the lenses could be sculpture courts that have informal framing of the temple. And it's a great Asian collection that they have. So we looked quite a bit at their collection, and we're inspired by the way the architecture and the landscape were engaged in those works. Here's the completed building, which has become a kind of landmark for Kansas City, and they use it in interesting ways. They leave it on. They have parties New Year's Eve there. It's become a kind of part of the nightlife in a funny way. The entry court with the largest lens, which is the lobby, and the old stone building. And the lenses are bent above to sort of pull you through, thinking about the perspective. And that draws you the space between the new building and the old then is cupped by this lens. In the center of the entry court is a work we collaborated on with Walter de Maria. This is his gold rectangular sun in the middle of the reflecting pool. And in the pool, he took our skylights and made them moons, round moons. So his piece is called One Sun and 34 Moons. And the moons, the skylights are set into the bottom of the pool. Here you see it. We designed the pool so it can freeze, so you avoid that whole problem of empty pools in the wintertime. And it just registers the seasons and the changing light. The glass is a very special glass. It has a stippled prismatic surface, so it's not shiny, and it picks up the light in varying ways and sort of amplifies the atmosphere. And at night, there you can really see the moons and the change of the seasons with its gold leaf and the ice. And at night, when it's frozen, those moons glow through the ice. It's really quite spectacular. But below the pool is the garage, which we conceived as a vehicular entry hall rather than a garage. The director liked that term, and so it's very generous. And most people, of course, arrive by car, and rather than, so we try to celebrate that. And the light coming from the pool, from the lenses, is vibrating from the surface of the water. In fact, last summer when I was there was a picnic. A family had set up a picnic around one of these lenses. It was a hot day, and they had their blanket down and their lawn chairs, and they were having a little picnic in the garage. So I thought, well, that's pretty good. But then once you enter the museum, the space opens up. The museum, really, you have to, from the outside, it's quite almost austere, you could say. But in the inside, the space opens up vertically in a really unexpected way. So we've been, actually, people, once they came inside, have a completely different impression of the building. It's all connected, flowing space that leads you down through. And this, I'd say, is our building which most exemplifies our interest in perspective and parallax, the way space and objects change as you move through them, always thinking about the point of movement, which is the element of time in architecture. Architecture is not it is a static thing, but of course our experience of it is through time. And one of the challenges, how do you design with time? And it's really through movement, perspective, and designing that way rather than as a fixed object. We're more interested in the space, and then the object results from that. So I think in this building, both side to side and up and down, you really feel that. As this stair goes up, this long stepped ramp that goes up to the lecture halls, and as it draws you down, this is the entry from the plaza there. And then we did a kind of inversion where we said, let's make the walls shiny and the glass dull. So when you expect the glass to reflect the light and the walls to absorb it, it's an inversion. So the space is incredibly light, and you're not sure which, where the light is coming on. And the glass has this absorptive glow of emanating the light, whereas the walls have this gentle sheen. So here you can see back to all the entrances, and the idea of orientation in a museum is so important. The fact when you come in the front door, you know where to go. You don't need signs. This is key. Circulation for a museum is so important, and we've done quite a few, and giving choice to the visitor, letting them know through the architecture how to experience the building and what different discoveries there are as it unfolds. So the lenses, the walls of the glass, are actually made up of two layers. An outer layer, which has that soft matte finish, so it's not specular, and that has translucent insulation that cuts out the heat and the UV. And then there's a cavity, which has services, lighting, structure, shades, and here you can see the people walking in the service cavity. And then the inside layer, which is also diffuse. So the light goes through so many layers of diffusion and treatment that it almost becomes mist-like. Here you can see that's a shadow on the lower part. A shadow registers blue, and the direct very warm. So it's a kind of instrument of light. It amplifies the natural qualities in light through treating it through so many layers of glass and giving it this kind of ethereal quality. Here's the plan stepping down through the galleries all on one level. You can see there by number 5 the connection to the old museum. What we did is we actually reused the old entrance at grade and reformed a grade above it so that there's a direct connection. There you can see the old entrance, which used to be the outside street level, but now is the lobby. And that sets up a new cross-axis through the old museum, where the number 13 is we cut a stair, and that connected all the major spaces of the museum on this cross-axis. Everybody else was connecting the other way. And this was we kind of unlocked this connection, so the two really act as one museum, even though they have these completely different characters. The collection is organized in a series of loops. So the idea is you can experience this as one continuous loop or two collections, or just bypass what we call the gallery walk, or the director calls the speedway, which is along the bottom. So really, there's many ways to experience the art, but you always know where you are because you have the orientation to the landscape and to this more direct route. So we have modern and contemporary, we have photography and African, and special exhibitions centered around the Noguchi Court. So their contemporary collection then steps down. Here's the first lens where you see that light being caught. And the curators built, I know you guys are planning an expansion, so I have to applaud the whole staff at the Nelson Atkins Museum. The curators built the quarter-inch scale models of all the galleries, and scale models of the pieces. Of course, you guys have a different kind of approach, but the point is they took these kinds of spaces and found ways to really place art in that takes advantage of the variation of the spaces. If you look at some museums now, like MoMA, the idea is to make normal rectangles that actually, after a while, all look the same, all feel the same, and in my opinion, begin to numb the individuality of the art. That's just, I shouldn't say that, but be critical. But I think there is this idea that particularity of space and of gallery and a specialness of a gallery can heighten the individuality of that work. So you feel like, oh, you're in a new place, you're experiencing a new work. You're not in the same gallery you were 4 galleries ago, where at that time it was Picasso and now it's Matisse. And this, you know, I don't know. It'll be an interesting experience. I look forward to your new project. But this was a lot of fun working with the curators. We made a lot of changes to the galleries based on their studies. It was a real collaborative effort, and but what we came out with was not something that was generic. Something that's very special in each place. And for example, they put this Judd right here on this wall. I love the way the verticality is caught and pulled right down from the light. And then this idea of parallax and multiple paths. Here, the way we worked with the walls and the spaces is the spaces don't recede to a single vanishing point. And that gives a kind of open-endedness that's always drawing you through. And it's a little bit like we were sort of thinking about ways of thinking about space and designing space. And the Chinese scroll painting, what's interesting about Chinese scroll painting is they attempted to capture the element of time in a two-dimensional art experience, because you experience these, they're very long scrolls, you roll up one side and unravel the other. So it's meant to be experienced through time, and it has that built in. What that means is they can't use traditional single-point perspective, because that would stop you in your tracks. So they, of course, use axonometric or isonometric or shifting perspectives. You'll see, and that's the way that the walls shift as you experience the scroll, draws you through the whole scroll. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's a stretch, but it's analogous to the way we were thinking about the space, that these angles and sculpting of the space pulls you through, while at the same time creating very good surfaces for the art. All the walls are vertical. They all come to the wall in a very clean way. We supplement the natural light with flexible incandescent light. The natural light comes in through these lenses. As I mentioned, we open it up to mixed north and south light. They're called flutters. There's the cavity. So here, for example, is the light is brighter at the top, but when you get to the art zone, it meets the conservation criteria. Here you can see the cool north light, but coming through in those little triangles is the warm south light. The Noguchi Court, they have a great collection of 8 Noguchis that are very special. And right from the competition, Steven had the idea of taking the fountains and extending the bed outside to make this bond between the landscape and the art. And this was a day when I visited the site with the New York Times critic, and it was cloudy flying in, and it was just an awful day, a gray, gray day. But as we rounded the hill, the clouds lifted and a rainbow came out, and I was quite happy. He turned to me and said, "This is really too much. You can't do this. This rainbow is real." So anyway, fortunately, we got a little bit of a break. But here's some of the spaces between the lenses. This is Tony Craig. They have several pieces that are then framed between these 2 lenses. Of course, you're standing over a gallery. You wouldn't know it, and that's the idea. Cascading down through the landscape. And of course, this part of the museum is open 24 hours. These outdoor sculpture courts and the park. And that was the idea, to really wrap the public around the museum and infuse the museum into the city. So people walk their dogs across the museum. They're out all hours. And that's the presentation. Thank you.
Take a couple questions.
Sure, I can take questions. Anyone? Could we turn up the lights? Or no, I was there a lot earlier than Bill McDonough, and I don't think we were directly influenced. I mean, certainly he was a pioneer in many of these ideas. It's just a growing consciousness of the environment, and we've been working with some great engineers over the years. Matthias Schuler of TransSolar, who's one of the best sustainable engineers we think in the globe. He's based in Germany. He designed the geothermal system for Beijing. Mahadev Raman from Arup. And it's really, I mean, if you think about sustainability, it's a kind of basic architectural principle. We don't see it as a separate discipline or as a kind of separate from good architectural practice. And a lot of it is traditional building technique, pre-mechanical air conditioning. So we try to combine the best of the traditional. For example, in that ACT book, a lot of thermal mass, building below grade. Those are all good things that have been done for centuries. But it's combined with the most cutting-edge techniques like geothermal wells, computer-controlled shade systems. So it's this, and then creating a good environment that people want to be in is, with great light. Like at the Nelson Atkins, the woman who runs the bookstore came up to me and she said, "Oh, I love coming to work every day. I want to come to the building." And so that, that's the ultimate. It doesn't have to do with the kind of rhetoric necessarily of sustainability.
Jen?
Uh-huh. Well, they are expensive. They're high-end apartments, and at this level, that's really where the only innovative stuff is going on in China, unfortunately. And we designed them. We were able to do the interiors. There is a very wide range of sizes and types, from penthouse duplexes to small studios. There's a maximum. There are actually 64 different apartment types in the complex, and a lot of them hinge on. A lot of them are designed. Well, I didn't get into it. I didn't show it. We didn't have time. But we have the concept of hinge space apartments, where there are large pivoting panels that allow, instead of defined bedrooms, you can make a separate bedroom, or you can open it up. So it's part of the living room as a studio, or it could be closed off as an in-laws bedroom. So they're kind of adaptable spaces over time, rather than such fixed two-bedroom. And they did. Well, about 60% of the apartments are built that way. The other are more conventional, because the developer was a little uncertain. But the ones that are selling are actually the hinged. The ones that are selling out first are the flexible ones. There's also office space, which I didn't mention, as part of this idea of hybrids, maximum mixed use. So you have 24-hour places, and actually we're moving our office to there.
Paul?
There's a lot of concrete and stone, actually. No brick yet. I don't know why that is. We're not against brick. It's just we've been exploring, more. We're interested in new developments. Of course, concrete's been around forever. But in the Nelson Atkins, a lot of the building walls, where there are building walls, are in board-formed concrete, very thin slats. They're basically 2x4s ripped, so it's very thin. It looks like stacked shale. And those are kind of they look like a landscape wall. That's why we're interested in concrete. Obviously, a lot of concrete in the structure. And stone, the Nelson Atkins has a lot of stone paving. In China, we use local stone for the paving. On the facades and the exteriors, I'm not sure why we haven't. We're actually doing a stone building right now. Part of it is those old building techniques have become, in our view, compromised because the stone cladding now is 3/4 inch thick and slapped onto a building face. You know, when it's made in a way that is, you can feel the thickness of the stone and it has a kind of integrity of how it's, instead of just being a hung surface. That's the part of the problem with stone is on a wall is, unfortunately, it's become a kind of wallpaper, and we prefer a kind of thicker notion of the material. We have actually quite a few concrete facades. I didn't show it tonight, but we've done, and we're interested in the way you can form it using new techniques. You can actually styrofoam cut forms to get interesting shapes, and we do a lot of, line the forms with various things, get different textures. That project in Turkey is all exposed concrete. That's white. It's white pigmented concrete.
Yes.
Yeah, we're trying to find new techniques and new effects that come from the material. One of the great things with metal now, actually with any material, is the digitally perforated fabrication, where you can go straight from a computer file to any kind of pattern. So there's a kind of re-injection of customization. You know, for so long we faced a kind of standardization and a banality of materials because it was all mass produced, and because of these new digital techniques, we're able to bring a craft back pretty economically through fabrication techniques, and we've been exploring that with metal skins, curtain wall assemblies, and formwork as well. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the last question first. Translucent concrete, we are using it in a house. It's still very expensive, so it's a great material, but it's not quite to the point where we're working with one of the developers of it for a house to try to find ways to make it more translucent. It's also not that translucent yet. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting research into materials going on. The first question is a tough one. I've heard both arguments about that. And because the work we've done so far has been with private developers, we actually there's a limit to what we can do because they're, of course, interested in their bottom line. We've focused on infusing them with public space and publicly accessible space that areas around it can use, and also with minimizing fossil fuel use and minimizing the carbon footprint as a kind of positive. I mean, we can't say to them, you got to have 20% affordable housing units, because that's, that they have certain equations and ways of working. So we find it easier to get them to sort of thinking more openly on these other issues than the housing. Some cities do require a certain amount of affordable housing more and more, which is a very positive thing, especially in New York, where it's very hard to find affordable housing anymore. And a lot of the work in Brooklyn and some of the developments we've done in New York have that as a requirement. But some people say actually putting them next to each other doesn't help make people aware of other people's conditions. It actually creates a kind of friction that's not helpful. Right, right. Well, that's the key thing. You can't control it, which we see as a real positive, right? Because that means they can't, I mean, it's property line, so I guess they could kick you out, but it's, people are encouraged to come in and enjoy the water, enjoy the landscape, whatever it is, whoever they are. I personally don't know of any developments where they've put them side by side, and I think it's a challenge. I mean, affordable housing is a huge. The problem is, neighborhoods that are affordable are identified, well, as we all know, gentrification, and then there's no affordable housing anymore, and this is then a lot of the things that made it interesting, artists or whoever, or just people who don't have enough money to afford it, they have to live way out there, and now you've created a kind of, without gates or walls, you've created a separation. So it's a challenge for city governments. I have to say I didn't show it, we're working in Toronto, and they're developing their whole waterfront. And that's the best example I've seen of a public-private kind of development situation, because they have huge acreage. The city, state, and federal government combined all their land, all this old industrial land, put it together, made one development entity, and it's run by really smart people who love architecture and urbanism. And they've had international competitions. They've got people like West 8 and Van Valkenburg and the best urban thinkers and architects working there, and they stipulate a certain amount of affordable housing. They also stipulate good design. So when they give an RFP to a developer, first of all, they do a master plan. Then they have RFPs for individual sites. And when they issue those, when they give award a job to a developer, it has to be a developer architect team, not just a developer. And it's not just based on the money that the developer offers. It's also based on the quality of the design. So this is a huge challenge. New York doesn't have it right. New York's trying to build public space with private development, which has, in my view, fails often. But I think Toronto's got a good model. A lot of European cities have good models where they bring the private. You need private development. You have to have a partnership. That's a positive thing for everyone, but it needs to be done in a way that the public realm is protected.
There's one more question.
A comment. Wow, fabulous creativity. Congratulations on some marvelous projects.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good one to end on. Okay, thank you. Good luck with your new museum. It's very exciting.